Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Nick Hillman. I'm director of HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, and I'm talking to you from HEPI Towers in Oxford. And this is a webinar on universities and AI, held partly because we've recently published a report, which hopefully you can see in my hand and behind me, and which is freely available on our website, which is a collection of essays about all sorts of ways in which all sorts of experts think AI is and will transform higher education in the UK and indeed globally. And the format of the webinar, similar to other HEPI webinars, if you've attended one before, is we're going to hear some introductory remarks from five different people. I will introduce them as we go. They all contributed to this publication. And I've asked them just to speak for 5 minutes each, and then there will be an opportunity to put questions to them. So please do feed in any questions you've got into the Q&A. Any tech problems, put them in the chat, but any questions, please put them in the Q&A. And please upvote the questions you want to see answered, because I'm expecting a lot of questions. We won't get through them all. And I will be putting the questions that are most popular, most upvoted to the panelists. The only other little bit of housekeeping is this is an on the record session. We plan to make the recording of it available afterwards. You can put anonymous questions as well as named questions if you want to do that. And as I say, I'm going to introduce our panelists as we go. So the very first panelist is Dr. Giles Carden from the University of Southampton. And this publication simply would not have happened without Giles driving it forward. His job title is Chief Strategy Officer and Chief of Staff, and hence you won't be surprised to know that his chapter in the publication was on the future of strategy, AI and the future of strategy. And Giles is currently in the US, but the wonders of technology means that although it's the middle of the night where you are, Giles, we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thanks.
Right, thanks very much, Nick. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Nick, for that introduction to the publication. So first, I want to offer my sincere thanks to all the authors for their contributions to the essay collection. And I want to make clear it's not a technical manual. HEPI likes its content to be accessible. So if you're a techie, I'm afraid it's not for you, but it is widely accessible to folks across the sector. So I propose this volume on AI because, in my view, it's the most profound external force shaping business, government, and civil society that I've seen in my 30-year career to date. And over that career, I've seen the rise of the internet, email, mobile phones, all transformative, yet they pale in comparison to the rise of AI in terms of what its impact's going to be. So we often imagine the future as linear, but it isn't. The computer scientist Ray Kurzweil, in his Law of Accelerating Returns, predicts the 21st century will deliver 1,000 times the progress of the last century. And Singularity University calls this a period of tech-driven exponential growth. Today, I'm not going to dwell on my essay, actually, on AI and strategy. That's there for you to read. Some of you will read it. Instead, I want to talk about a different and I think even more important provocation, and something I will publish very soon, which was sparked by a conversation with my good friend Anne Bagshaw, who's on this call and will speak next, when we had a conversation long distance between the UK and Australia back in May. So AI presents both a profound threat and opportunity to higher education, in my view. Universities have four core purposes: education, research, and enterprise, and knowledge exchange. But today I'm going to focus on education. Graduate employment in the UK is at its highest rate since 2018, with similar trends in the US and Europe. Major firms like Accenture and Goldman Sachs have cut jobs, and Google is saying that it can actually educate its own entry-level employees now. And there's some recent research from Eric Brynjolfsson at Stanford, which has been published this year, which clearly demonstrates that AI is now impacting the graduate job market, although there is evidence that suggests if you have a degree, you are more likely to get a job. So most firms are still in an early adoption phase of AI. A recent study of 300 projects published by MIT researchers showed that only 5% of those 300 projects were actually demonstrating P&L gains. That said, we are in the early stage of the change curve, and adoption will accelerate fast. People will learn from failure and will get better at implementations. So AI's impact is expanding the jobs market across banking, finance, accounting, IT, creative arts, journalism, and more. Prospects.ac.uk reports that 11% of graduates have already changed their plans because of AI. Nexford University, which is an online institution in DC, surveyed 1,000 hiring managers and found that 26% see AI fluency as a baseline requirement. 40% trust graduates more if the university required hands-on use of AI across subjects, and 22% rank AI fluency as equal or more important than communication skills. We are now in an era that is termed hybrid collective intelligence, where human insight meets AI. Harvard's doing a lot of research into hybrid collective intelligence, and it's surveyed over 1,100 leaders via its Global Leadership Development Study. And leaders across a range of sectors are saying that as AI scales tasks, judgment, empathy, and creativity is more important than ever. Dr. Vivian Ming of UC Berkeley thinks of AI as not just something to automate tasks, but as augmenting human capacity. Her work emphasizes using AI to challenge individuals, what she calls productive friction, to help people grow intellectually and emotionally. Excuse me. So I put it to you today, if we fail to embed AI fluency across the curricula, our value proposition will erode across the sector. If graduates can't secure jobs, why incur substantial debt to attend university? Why should governments keep spending billions? The Student Loan Company in England issued £19.7 billion of debt last year and recovered only £5 billion. That doesn't look sustainable to me. We're an inflection point, I believe. Institutions that invest now in AI fluency, an AI fluency strategy, making it ubiquitous and mandatory across the curriculum, will thrive. Those that don't may well wither on the vine. And one last thought on exponentials. I was talking to Dr. Mark Jackson at Quantinium, the world's largest integrated quantum computing company, last week. And he predicts quantum computing will have a real world impact within 5 years. And I agree with him. The future is exponential. Finally, I'm thinking of establishing an AI Futures strategy group. And if you're interested in joining, please connect with me on LinkedIn and direct message me. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Giles. And we'll come back to some of those things, I'm sure, in the Q&A. So we've gone to North America, where Giles is. We're now going to go down under to Australia, where Ant Bagshaw is. Ant is also one of the contributors to this collection. Ant's day job is being Deputy Chief Executive at the Australian Public Policy Institute in Canberra. But many of us will know him from his long stint in the UK, working in higher education policy. And Ant's chapter in the collection was called It Is Time for University Professional Services to Embrace Gen AI. So over to you, Ant.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Giles, for the invitation to contribute to this collection. I'm based in Canberra on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm not an uncritical techno-optimist, and I understand the many and really valid concerns about AI, including bias, misuse, hallucinations, all of that. But I'm also very conscious that we have issues with our universities at the moment, so we can't assume that a future flawed system is necessarily worse than a current flawed system. And I completely agree with the other contributors to the collection who've spoken of the need for improving AI literacy, for upskilling, for ethical safeguards around implementation. And I think that humane responses to technology developments are essential. But we also need to ask ourselves whether all of the roles in university professional services still need to exist in the context of AI. And I think we're not looking necessarily enough at trying to lock in as many productivity gains as we can. we know, particularly in the UK, but in many other systems, including here in Australia, there is a huge amount of pressure to do more with at least the same, or maybe more with less. And I think there is an unusual and potentially a unique opportunity, certainly in my experience of working in the sector, that we have an opportunity for actually material productivity gains in the way that universities are run. Clearly, this has implications for individuals. I'm not blind to that. I was quite surprised in the commentary about the collection that it focused a lot on what I'd written, as if it was some callous take. I actually argue that I think it is more harmful to keep people in jobs that can be better done by robots than to enable those people to find either better jobs within the university or indeed better jobs elsewhere and outside. I think as a learning sector and as a frontier knowledge creation ecosystem, we need to embrace those changes and support people through. And so I think there's a fundamental personal obligation to each and every individual, but there's also a mission obligation. The university does not exist to serve its staff. It exists to serve those needs, to serve its mission of education, research, and as Giles put, that richer mission, also of knowledge exchange, of enterprise, of civic engagement, and so on. And so I think for the personal, but also for the mission, we have to say, let us seek productivity gains that can come from the application of AI tools. Don't think it's going to solve everything, but if we can do things cheaper, as well, if not better, with the tools, then we should embrace them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ant, and thank you for keeping to time, which will enable us to get to some of the very many questions that are already flooding in. Our next speaker is Professor Janice Kay, who not only is a contributor to the collection in a chapter about what it means for the university workforce, but also I see Janice has a piece up on AI, about AI on Wonky this morning as well. So you're everywhere on this issue. So over to you, Janice.
Thanks, Nick. I want to acknowledge my co-author, Jeff Lowen. I've done a bit of polemic for you that I'm going to zip through. The Office for Students recently made a welcome intervention. It encouraged universities to make bold changes to adapt in this increasingly challenging environment. And they're right. But why aren't we being bold? Why, as a sector, do we squeeze AI tools into what we already do instead of completely rethinking how we teach and how we assess? How do we give our educators the confidence and the skills to think differently while also engaging our learners where they are? Our argument is that we need to move from piecemeal adaptation towards something much more deliberate, an AI-first approach to workforce planning across the whole institution. Every role should have a clear understanding of how AI can add value, and every colleague supported with a development roadmap to reaching competence. That means embedding AI capability as a core institutional priority, not an afterthought. And yes, that also means that some traditional job roles will change dramatically and that some will disappear altogether through automation. We must start by understanding where we are. AI competency isn't about everyone becoming data scientists. It's understanding the basics, what AI and large language models are, how AI-driven analytics work, and how to use prompts effectively, from simple to sophisticated. And there are some great examples of this kind of thinking. As part of its new digital strategy, Exeter University has been assessing staff confidence and motivation in using digital tools. Over 45% of staff have engaged so far, with 778 self-assessments completed, a great base for building digital confidence across the organisation. But it also shows the need to be specific. The skills of an educator are not the same as a programme administrator or student welfare advisor. Once we've established levels of competency, the next step must be a well-supported development programme. Institutions can and should create incentives for staff to develop the skills fit for their roles. That might be through micro-credentials, professional development credits, or even promotion criteria. And crucially, people need time to experiment, play, fail, learn. AI proficiency shouldn't be an optional extra, should be part of the job. And we need to be intentional about developing AI leaders. We can't just leave it to chance. We should be identifying and empowering the people who can critically evaluate new technologies and embed them in ways that are ethical, pedagogically sound, and discipline specific. These are the people who can bring real meaning to personalization in learning. And AI fluency isn't just technical know-how. It sits alongside learning science, assessment integrity, and data ethics. As a recent Skills England report put it, in this generative AI revolution, we need technical, non-technical, and responsibility skills. So ultimately, this is about structural change. We need to transform the AI competence of the higher education workforce. But that transformation must go together with how our institutions use AI and digital technologies. Educators will become coach, curator, problem setter, verifier. Professionals will move even more towards designing and governing intelligent workflows. AI systems should be built into academic and student workflows, not bolted on. The Cortex-Said partnership is a great example of this. It's helping academics reimagine learning to become genuinely personalised. Embedding an AI assistant right into the VLE is reshaping design of modules, materials and assessments. And as the CIDO of Said Business School puts it, the partnership is empowering our faculty and learning designers to create smarter, data-driven courses and giving our students a more adaptive, hyper-personalised and engaging learning environment. That's exactly the kind of bold partnership we need more of. Projects that not only enhance teaching and learning, but build the AI skills and confidence our workforce and our students need to thrive in the future.
Thank you, Janice. Fantastic. And do read more about that in Janice's chapter, co-authored in the collection, as she rightly pointed out. So next we've got Professor Rose Luckin, another chapter in the collection that got a lot of media interest. And Rose is at UCL, Professor of Learner Centre Design at UCL Knowledge Lab, Director of Educate and member of the Computing College of the ESPRC as well. And Rose's chapter was all about AI and human intelligence and what it means for human intelligence. Over to you, Rose.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for inviting me both to this webinar and to contribute the chapter. And thanks to my fellow presenters. I hope the audience have enjoyed their contributions as much as I have. Really interesting. I really want to focus on human intelligence because that's what really matters here, isn't it? And I think we do face a profound paradox at the moment. At the very moment, we're developing these sophisticated AI tools. We are at risk of dumbing down our wonderful, rich, amazing human intelligence because we need humans to be more intelligent now. That means we need to work intellectually much, much harder, irrelevant to all the messaging and hype that comes out of Silicon Valley telling us that AI is going to make our lives easier and effortless. It's not, or it's not if we want to get it right. This is the moment when, as humans, we have to evolve our intelligence to be way more sophisticated than it is now, because we've now got these really smart tools to work with and to help us be that much more intelligent individual. And I think it's all down to a perfect storm and a critical tension. So the perfect storm is the creation of machine learning, which requires data, lots of it, and good quality, algorithms, smart, deep learning algorithms, and processing power, amazing amounts of it. Hence why we see the huge investments being made by the large tech companies in data centers and infrastructure. And that is what's bringing about this critical tension, this tension between things that are there to make us more productive, to make us more effective, and actually the moment that we have to reimagine, redefine, reconceptualize human intelligence and the way that we assess it in order to ensure that we go on as the smartest beings on the planet. And I think higher education faces a critical infrastructure in this respect. So I said that perfect storm: data, algorithms, processing power, data. Do we have the data and do we have the infrastructure to really leverage these technologies to make us smarter? And in the chapter and here, I talk in the terms of the pipes and the poems, thanks to a friend of mine who gave me this lovely analogy. So the poems represent the transformative educational experience that AI could enable, with nuanced, sophisticated, intelligent analytics that enables to track and trace the micro steps that we make as we learn and become the best learners on the planet. Because that's why AI is done so well, because machine learning is so good at learning. And so the poems are the dreams, the transformational potential that this technology brings for us as humans to become much, much, much more sophisticated in our intelligence. But the pipes are the things that enable the poems. That's the robust data infrastructure. Those poems are only possible if we have that robust data infrastructure. And so I think that gives us a set of challenges as higher education institutions: quality and comprehensiveness of the data that's available to us, integration of siloed data systems that I know all of us struggle with, ethical considerations around student data, and for my money, the whole subject of data stewardship is a hot potato that's going to become a huge issue in the coming months and years. Building institutional data literacy. They're just 4 of the challenges that I think that we face if we really want to get those pipes in place so that we can get the poems flying. So I think, yeah, we need to reimagine the way that we assess. That's the call to action for higher education, isn't it? To make sure that we are increasingly intelligent, we need to rethink the way that we assess so that we're always looking to assess through whatever subject a student is studying, the development of those really sophisticated thinking, learning capabilities, self-understanding, epistemic cognition, critical thinking. That's what we really must make sure that we embed with our students so that they can understand themselves as learners and understand what knowledge is and how they learn, how they go on acquiring it. So we need to engage our students in that critical feedback, that problem solving, but recognize their motivation can fluctuate and find ever more interesting ways to keep them motivated in that intellectual challenge, that strenuous mental effort that's required to build that ever more sophisticated human intelligence. So yeah, we need to develop the data strategies, the pipes, to enable the poems. And I'm going to stop there, Nick.
Thank you, Rose. Sorry, there's a slight delay in turning my camera and audio back on. Thank you, Rose. Superb. So our last speaker before we go to the ever-growing list of questions is Dr. Sudhir Pawana, who's a PwC, a partner at PwC, another author in this collection. His chapter was particularly around what AI means for professional services. And Sudhir is also the OpenAI UK Alliance leader, so very steeped in all things AI and its ever-changing world. So Sudhir, over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and a pleasure to be with you all here this morning. Look, when we talk about AI in higher education, the focus is often on, how we might change teaching, assessments, or even research. But there's another equally important opportunity: transforming professional services that sits behind every student journey. These are the teams that are managing things like finance, admissions, HR, student well-being, the operations that make the whole system work. And right now, some of these teams can be under strain: tight budgets, growing student numbers, and rising expectations. AI gives us an opportunity to rethink how this work is done, not by removing people, but by freeing up them so they can focus on what only people can do. And let me work through 5 things at a high level that I think are really going to help us move the dial on this going forwards. The first step is a focus AI where there's immediate value and impact on high volume, repetitive processes that absorb time and resources. One example is a university that introduced an AI powered chatbot. It provides 24/7 answers to common questions related to times tables, documents, joining societies, checking well-being, giving students instant support and reducing pressure on frontline staff. But the real impact isn't just getting quicker answers. The systems have freed up advisors to focus on more complex and sensitive issues, the conversations that require empathy and judgment. This is the essence of good AI. Take away the transactional so people can focus on the transformational. The second, change only works if people are part of shaping it. The best cases I've seen work are when professional services teams were involved from the start, helping design and test new automation systems. Because their insights shaped the way the tools work, they saw AI not as a threat, but as something that can be make their work easier effectively. That engagement turned potential resistance into ownership. It meant the technology reflected real workflows, not theoretical ones. And what I've seen is when staff co-design the tools they use, they become partners in innovation. And that's when adoption really takes off. Third, we need to build confidence and capability, a topic that has been talked about a lot throughout the other talks prior to this as well. Across higher education, many teams are experimenting with AI, but often without structured support. Staff need the space to learn, to experiment safely, and to share what they discover. Many professional services organizations, like our own PwC, have introduced training and informal learning communities to help staff understand the AI tools available and use them ethically. The result is faster adoption and stronger sense of empowerment, a feeling that AI is something to work with, not something done to them. Upskilling isn't just about technical literacy, it's about building confidence and curiosity. Fourth, as we introduce AI, we must do it responsibly and transparently. Professional services handle some of the most sensitive student data, from finances to personal records, and AI systems must meet the high standards of privacy, fairness, and accountability. The lessons learned from early adopters is clear. Predictive tools should support human decision-making, but not replace it. When algorithms identify that students, might be at risk of disengagement, it's the human judgment, the empathy, the conversations, the interventions that make the difference. Similarly with HR, we need to take care that the AI doesn't inadvertently introduce bias based on data it's learned from in the past. AI can certainly flag the signal, but people who need to deliver the care. And finally, we need to share what works. Cultural change doesn't happen through policy alone. It spreads through stories. When organizations share AI, start with AI, pilots can show how AI can reduce workloads, speed up responses, improve student satisfaction. When those successes are shared, and not just the technology aspects, but the human outcomes, others feel encouraged to try and adopt and to learn. The storytelling builds momentum. It shifts conversations from what if to look what's possible. So look, if there's one message to take away from this, AI in professional services isn't just about efficiency. It's about liberating people to do the higher value work that truly matters. By automating the routine, we can give people time to listen, to guide, and to connect. We let professional services use judgment and empathy to design interventions, support students, and help them thrive. If we start small, design together, invest in people, act ethically, and share stories, we can create not just more efficient universities, but more human ones as well. That's the real promise of AI in higher education. And Nick, back to you.
Superb. Thank you. Thank you to you, Sudhir, and thank you to all our panelists for keeping so well to time, because it allows us to get through a lot of these questions that are flooding in. I'm going to take 5 in one go, and then I'm going to go back to the panel. And please, panelists, don't feel you need to answer every one. Indeed, if I put 5 questions to 5 panelists, you may not want to answer more than one of them. But let's go through them in the order in which they've been upvoted. And the first one is by someone called Alexander Gregory, and it's very straightforward. Which degrees do you predict will suffer the most from AI? And in fact, Derek Ord has put a subsequent question to that, where he said, and which will gain? So which degrees will be most affected? Secondly, we've got Oliver Olchin, who said, we're already seeing wobbles in the AI bubble on the stock market. And there's evidence to suggest businesses are struggling to find effective uses of generative AI. There's also evidence to suggest that cognitive offloading experienced by students using AI is harmful to their learning. Do universities have a role to play in questioning and pushing back on some of the AI hype? There are some subsequent comments there as well, which people can look at themselves. Then we've got a third question. What do you all think would be an acceptable use of AI by PhD students specifically PhD students, research-focused students. Fourthly is a question around the environmental cost of AI, which of course we all know is significant and maybe in contrast to universities' plans to hit net zero. And then finally, within all this strategic embedding of AI in education, what are the reflections on the environmental impact? Another environmental impact one linked to the environmental cost of AI. So let's put those back to the panel. I think I'll go in reverse order this time. Sudhir.
Sorry, Nick, just turning myself off mute there. Look, it's a really interesting question, particularly about the degrees and which degrees will do better. I think I would look at it a slightly different way and think about what are the characteristics of the degree that may be disrupted by AI. And if we look at the current use of generative AI in particular, it's all focused around language. So, if there's, particular degrees that are focused on pure knowledge retention, using words, summarizing content, manipulating language to do various things, those type of tasks within those degrees, may be somewhat supported and even automated by parts of AI. But actually, there's a school of thought that actually says, well, we need to focus more on the critical thinking. And the example I'll give is legal. What legal profession is one that I think is one that people worry about because it is heavily language-based and knowledge-based. But actually, whilst there may be some elements of it, for example, if somebody gives you the assets that you need for a will, that's quite straightforward. There's not a lot of dispute there. But if you're working on a complex legal case and you've got two conflicting views, then the AI algorithms might be able to tell you that there's conflicting views, but there's not much more else you can do there. So actually, how do we then harness the other types of intelligence that humans bring, the emotional intelligence, the curiosity, the critical thinking? And I think that's something that we really need to work on and maybe look to elevate within the degree program. So I don't necessarily think there's any particular degree program at risk, but I think in terms of what we're teaching, that might need to, alter in some way so that we focus on the critical elements that not purely focused on the language side of things.
Great, thanks, Sudhir. Let's go to Rose. Which of those questions do you want to pick up, Rose?
I'd love to do something on the AI bubble because it's something I've been looking at quite a bit, and I'm not a financial expert, but there are some eye-watering numbers. I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen, Nick, but I've got one image that might be useful.
Let's try.
Okay. So this is from August, and I know we're now in October, but the situation has only got more extreme. It hasn't got less extreme. And so you can take that in for yourselves in terms of this is the Standard & Poor, one of the two indexes in the US. You can see the dominance of the Mag 7, and you can also see why people are thinking this might be a bubble again. I'm not necessarily saying it will or it won't, but what I worry about is that if it is, will be the collateral damage. And we need to think very seriously. Now, I did a calculation based on the Bain & Co. calculation about how much money the big tech companies would need to make in order to fund the data centers they've announced. It's $3 trillion a year. Now, I can't get my head around that number. So how many ChatGPT licenses at $20 a month does it take to generate $3 trillion worth of revenue a year? Now, I know that's not all, it's not going to all be generated by those licenses, but just so you know, it's more people than exist in the world. This is crazy stuff. And I think we've got to recognize that there are challenges here. I'm not sure the bubble's going to exactly burst, but I do worry that we'll end up seeing a lot of students paying for the tools that they use through advertisements and this kind of thing. There won't be free versions anymore. The free versions will be not just do you give your data, but you have to have a lot of adverts coming at you. So I absolutely think that the higher education community, and I thought it was really interesting what you said, Sudhir, about community and working together. I think it is about getting together and having a joined up voice to sometimes challenge things that perhaps aren't quite as solid as people might like us to think.
Thank you, Rose. So we could be on the cusp of the Dutch tulip bubble of the 17th century or not.
But the technologies won't disappear, Nick. That's the thing.
Yeah.
The technology will survive. That's what the dot-com bubble tells us. But it will just be different players and different business models.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to Janice now. Janice, we haven't addressed the environmental cost, particularly, and we haven't addressed the PhD student use yet.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a comment on what Rose has just said. And also say something about degrees, if I may, Nick, and then shove the difficult environment and energy questions onto Ant. So I think the corollary of what Rose is saying, the technology is not going to disappear, but actually the inequities that are going to be built in, obviously for individual learners, but also higher education institutions are just immense about this. So I think we absolutely have to think about that. In terms of degrees, I noticed that Rishi Sunak in his article in the Times on Saturday was forecasting the demise of computer science degrees with the advent of vibe coding, where actually you don't have to be a coder to use these technologies in sophisticated ways. And I think that is an advantage actually for our degrees, as long as we make sure our students are actually fit for understanding what they need to do in terms of the broad AI literacy. But I'd also say, let's not just think about degrees as degrees. This is about a whole revolution, not just in technologies, but actually in how we help people to learn and what learning is and what degrees are and what their purposes are. So this needs a bit of a reinvention.
Thank you, Janice. And Janice, through the environmental question, over to you. So, how do you
Yeah, so first off, enormously important and valid question. I guess I think about it from two dimensions. The first is to say everything we do has an environmental impact, and one of our questions I think needs to be weighing up critically the relative impacts of different activities, including wasteful work. So is it right in cases where work can be done more quickly, more cheaply with the tools? Have we weighed that up fairly against what I would argue is wasting someone's time doing that? And my second point is a broader one, which is something I've written on before. Others have too, but I will labour this point. Imagine if the university were to put all its resources, intellectual resources, onto this question. Then actually, I've approached this question from a professional services lens, and from a sort of admittedly managerialist approach. Let's imagine that we were to take this challenge holistically and say, what can we do with our researchers? And I think that's the point, the same with the challenging the AI hype. My biggest concern actually is that universities, because of the weight of these companies, as Rose has shown, like these enormous businesses, that they just completely dominate the discourse, and that there is no room for criticality. There is no room for alternative perspectives on AI tools. And that is where I think, yes, individual researchers might have an impact, maybe institutions, but perhaps the sector as a whole needs more of a coordinated response to say, well, yes, collectively, we have a huge amount of intellectual resource and other resources to be able to explore, yes, the ethics, yes, the environmental piece, clearly the human impacts, and all of those dimensions. So realizing the learning organization.
Thank you. Giles, is there anything you wish to add in this round?
Yeah, a couple of quick remarks from me. The evidence suggests on the degrees, the discipline areas that are suffering, that they're in the sort of finance, banking, IT, and Sud mentioned law. Now, what we don't know, of course, is what new jobs are going to be created. And I talked about hybrid collective intelligence, and I think others speakers talked about that. We've got to think about these new jobs where humans work with AI. And actually, there's a lot of evidence coming out from new research now that where you have diverse, high-performing teams working with AI, no surprise, they perform better than AI, and they perform better than teams on their own. So I think that's the way you think about it. I've got to say something about the AI stock bubble because I have to admit I've de-risked my pension 2 weeks ago because I do think it's hyped. And I think we've already seen some correction in the last couple of days, and that may well continue into this week. Who knows? If anybody can predict the stock market, where it will land would be good. But when the Magnificent Seven are worth 37% of the Standard & Poor 500, that there's a bubble. So there is hype, but every technology revolution, as Rose said, in the dot-com bubble, every technological revolution has had hype, right? But that doesn't mean it's not going to have long-term impact.
Thank you, Giles. You've de-risked your pension against the AI bubble. Have you de-risked it against the risk of the budget coming up? We will find out
I'll do
on
that,
the
Nick.
26th of November, because there's so many rumours floating around, are there not? So let's go back to the questions. We've got one from Maya. How do you suggest to introduce fluency in the technology that is not entirely reliable and fluent in itself? What about integrating more critical thinking and ability to question AI processes and impact? I'm sure you'll all have thoughts on that, but maybe Rose in particular, you may. Fran Sutherland, do we need a new definition of academic integrity? I think that speaks for itself. Camilla asks, why is no one talking about the environmental impacts of embracing AI? What about data? Right, we've sort of touched, I think, already on the environmental impact. There's, of course, plenty more to say. But Camilla also asks, what about data privacy for our students? Tech is only trusted, isn't it, if people think their data is secure? And then we've got Lucia. Within all this strategic embedding of AI in education, what are the reflections on the environmental implications of AI and the challenges it places on net zero strategies? I think we've touched on that, haven't we? So I'll do one more, and then I'll go back to the panel. How do we encourage universities to reframe their relationship with AI and position themselves as ethically driven developers of AI tools, uses and functions, rather than consumers of big tech ethically light TUFs, AI tools, uses and functions? So I'm going to go in a random order this time. Ant.
Thanks, Nick. One of the questions I've got in response to this is, do we need to think more deeply about what the product is that universities are offering? So this, I think, I'm trying to speak to the first question there about critical skills. One of the things I think about is universities have been places to store knowledge and to transmit knowledge. If knowledge becomes something that is very readily accessible for very close to free or free, if we were fully costing the environmental impacts, point taken, but in terms of like at the point of use, free, we potentially change what the role that the university has in terms of the essential bit about what I would call kind of discernment. That's something I'm really concerned about, for example, with junior colleagues, like discernment, and very much a view informed by Rose. I'm maybe stealing your thunder there, but it is the judgment, the criticality, the discernment that I think that matters. One of my concerns is, does the government think that's what it's paying for? Because if the governments, as they change, think that they're paying for the transmission of knowledge and that's suddenly free, does that undermine the current model in which the university exists? And so I wonder whether we need to work harder at reframing the value of the criticality and the distinct value that offers the human, augmented by the AI fluency. I don't think that's been fully explored and articulated.
Thank you. Let's go to Rose, as you mentioned, Rose.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Ant. Yeah, 100% to what you're saying, Ant. I think it is about reframing what we want human intelligence to be like, because there's a real difference between AI's knowledge and our human lived experience of the world and of people and that knowledge. And I think it's important to really distinguish the uniqueness of our human intelligence and value that to a much larger extent. And so thinking about what you're saying about what do governments think they're paying for, we need, I think, to really encourage them to think beyond the traditional conceptualization of knowledge in the academic sense, to recognize actually the amazing ways in which we are intelligent and we do know that are really important to the way that we operate in the world, how we solve problems together, how we survive as a society. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reframing that needs to be done. And in a sense, it's academia that needs to do that reframing, because we're the best place to do that. So I think you're absolutely right. And that's what I'd love to see, those kinds of intellectually searching questions about what it means to be intelligent and how does universities speak to that now.
Thank you. Let's go to Sudhir, particularly on this question around whether universities are too compliant. They're sort of consumers rather than designers of this tech. Is that fair?
It's a really interesting point, Nick, and I think, the hyperscalers, as they're called, the Microsofts, the OpenAIs, the Googles, they're sort of controlling the narrative. But I think there is also a real need to understand, the points that Anton and Rose have made just there. How do universities adopt this to really validate or create the new intelligence that we're going to need? Because if it's not language based anymore, then what is it actually that we're assessing and trying to build? And I'll give you a really interesting example. It's not a higher education, but I was speaking to a school that teaches GCSE students about how they're reinventing the way they assess students. And the example they gave me is there's one teacher now that's giving an assignment to a student where they have to write a report on a particular topic. Once that's done, they give them the mark scheme. The student marks their own work, and then the teacher marks how well the student marked their own work. Now, it sounds really strange, right? But if you think about what they're actually checking there, they're checking, given an output and a success criteria, can you critically analyze whether it's meeting the brief and whether, the facts are correct and all that? Because in future, whilst the individual wrote the report now, AI will be writing that report in future. So actually, we're assessing and building a different skill set and a different type of intelligence. And maybe even assessment processes might change from where actually, rather than have, a 3-hour assessment where 2 hours is spent writing the assignment and 1 hour is spent critically thinking at the start, it may be actually it's a 2.5-hour assignment where you're having to critically think, and you just use AI at the end to do the 30 minutes of writing. So there's a whole load of new thought in terms of how we can leverage this to actually build these capabilities of the future. And whilst I think the hyperscalers are pushing this technology onto us, I think universities have a really great opportunity to take that and actually set the pathway in terms of how we're going to change education in future.
Thank you. Giles.
Yeah, well, just a few marks on, first of all, on critical thinking. And there was an earlier remark in the last round about cognitive decline, which perhaps we didn't talk about in too much detail, which I think is a very important point. And that really leads us to think about how we need to redefine and rejig the curriculum. I mean, I cited Vivian Ming's work. If you go to her LinkedIn page, so she's at Berkeley, she's predicting that satellite navigation is going to cause a rise in dementia, which is really interesting. So that kind of link, now whether that'll be true or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting remark, and it does chime with what somebody was saying about cognitive offloading. So the curriculum's still got to be designed to challenge students intellectually, so they don't just entirely rely on AI, but they've also got to work with AI. The other point I was going to pick up quickly, Nick, was around the data. There was a data privacy on students. Of course, that is crucially important. But if I could open the debate up a bit more widely on data, one of the things that's occurred to me is universities have enormous amounts of data and enormous amounts of intellectual capital, right? Currently, we have a philosophy where that intellectual capital is published and is open access and it's made freely available. But that is a very valuable asset to train AI. And we shouldn't underestimate that. I mean, I believe I'm correct in saying, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Sud, you may know about this, Oxford signed a deal with OpenAI, and I believe OpenAI have got access to the Bodleian, which is an enormous resource. So universities shouldn't underestimate the intellectual assets they have in this paradigm as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go quickly to Janice, and then we'll do one more round of questions and give the panel a chance to make some concluding thoughts as well, ending by midday. So Janice, anything you want to add to the answers? I think you're on silent. You're on mute.
I love, Rose, your analogies of pipes and poems and the whole point about harnessing these technologies to make us more intelligent. And I also wanted to highlight actually the paper that Tom Chatfield has just written on AI and the future of pedagogy, which is wonderful in terms of thinking really much more deeply about how we think about learning and assessment. And, Suju, you were talking about the kind of creative ways of assessing. Well, actually, we were commonly using really very interesting ways of assessing the process of learning in our assessments that somehow, because of pressures and things, we've moved away on. So we definitely have to think about reimagining assessment, I think. But I also wanted to say something about integrity, data privacy, even actually intellectual property and ethics. I think this is basically going to say something about the way which we in universities run our governance systems, because actually there is just so much here that we cannot allow interventions to carry on in our universities in terms of looking at the way in which technologies make use of data or actually issues to do with integrity without actively managing it. And I think actually we can be, in the way that we do governance, emphasize much more our ethical human approaches to governance over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Thank you, Rose. I want to squeeze in a few more questions, and I'll go back to the panel, but we'll have to be brief, I think. But there's a couple of questions actually around sort of inequalities. So the first one is around, we're all in Anglophone countries. LLMs are more accurate and fluent in English. And so what does it mean for people who, speak other languages or who live in other parts of the world? Is it exacerbating inequalities? And there's also a question from Ross Renton, which is also about equalities and inequalities, which you might want to scroll down to and have a look at. Then there's a question from Alexander Gregory. Is there actual proof that the rollout of AI is freeing up work rather than just increasing the workload? Then we have an anonymous person who's asked, how can HE institutions work together to shape their future and take advantage of, rather than be a victim of the AI revolution? And I think there's another question which links a little bit to that, where it's asking around how actually can we do all this while we've got such limited financial resources and human resources, which of course, at least in the UK, are shrinking as all the redundancies happen. And then the final one, and I appreciate we won't be able to answer all of these, but give it as good a shot as you can. Could artificial intelligence become your classmate? Imagine your classmate is not a student, but an algorithm. How would education change? So I'm going to go in the reverse order from how we started. So I'm going to start with Sudhir and end with Giles. Sudhir.
Yeah, it's a really good question around the leveling up, Nick, and I do think you're right in terms of, initially it is sort of focused on sort of English and that sort of character set. One thing, and I think these things will catch up over time. I know China are investing heavily into their AI algorithms, and I think other countries will soon follow suit. So I think that will just be a matter of time. But what I will say, there are actually benefits in leveling up as well. So within our organization, for example, we have seen situations where people that suffer with dyslexia and naturally struggle to write documentation and these kind of things, it's been a real leveling up for them actually, and now they're able to still deliver really high value, really support their clients, do critical thinking, but actually when it comes to the part that was quite daunting for them, now they can dictate or they can use AI to support them in the writing and getting their ideas across. So actually, whilst I think there are some challenges on language thing, actually it can be a big leveling up as well, which I think is great for students in higher education.
Thank you. Nice positive note for your final word. Rose.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm going to tackle that one about resources, limited resources. I think, and it's true whether you've got limited resources or not, but let's face it, we've all got limited resources. I think you've got to be strategic. And you've got to be really strategic about how you engage with AI, and you've got very clear about what purpose you want it to deliver on. I think it's not about the technology, it's about what you want it to do for you. And you need to tackle that really strategically and in a very focused way. recognize that there's personal productivity, which is most of what we see at the moment, if indeed it is productive. Then you can have process productivity, where you've got multiple people operating in a coordinated way using the AI to improve the efficiency of a process. And then you've got system level productivity, which I'm not seeing at all. And I think that's down to that lack of systematic, strategic approach to adopting the AI. But whatever you do, start focused small with a clear purpose that you want the AI to serve you. And actually, by the way, Nick, Ant and I have a publication that's come out in a book this month on being strategic in the way that you engage with AI. So that might also be of interest.
Well, do add the link to that into the chat so people can have a look at that. Janice.
On the ethics question, it is a real challenge, isn't it? Because LLMs are, currently being trained on Western affluent material, and that is only going to continue, which of course is why we have to spend a lot of time with our students and staff in actually thinking about verification, how you verify, cross-checking, etc., etc. Yeah, I think it is going to be a particular problem that I'm not quite sure I can actually see a way out of at the moment. But it's also a question, I think, around governance frameworks, back to that, to be able to monitor and mitigate risks, Nick.
Thank you very much. If we had more time, I'd ask what the vinyl on your wall behind you is, but we don't have enough time for that. So, Ant, a final word to you.
I just want to kind of go back to Ross's question about bias. I think there is so much bias in our existing institutions, and it is human and it is lived. And yes, that is manifest in the documents that the AI models have been trained on. I actually think the opportunity, if you think about evolutions of institutions as not as being, more equitable, but then becoming, say, anti-racist, what does it mean to move to that shift? I think the potential here within AI tools is to build in the anti-racism, to build in better. Now, do I think that they're going to be completely dispassionate because of the training material? I think there's still a risk. I'm more worried, frankly, about biases in the existing human system, and so I think there's a potential for more correction with the AI tools.
Thank you. Another positive note. And so, Giles, over to you for the final word from you.
Yeah, just very, because we're short on time, pick out a few points. You would expect me to pick out the financial resource one. That's a very, very good point. The finances of the sector are the worst I've seen in my 30-year career. And frankly, the finances of the country aren't much better, with 97% of GDP in debt. But you cannot stop moving forward. You have to find the money, which means you have to become more efficient and save it. Because, this coming wave is not going to stop whether you like it or not. And I should add, it's important for us as a panel to remark that some people are scared of this technology. And I get that. But you also have to accept sometimes in life, there's certain things you can't stop. So how do you work with it? On the inequality side of thing, I agree with what's been said before, but I think it comes back to that point I made about hybrid collective intelligence. What we should see this technology as, and as higher education institutions, is working with the intelligence of humans to optimize outcomes, not relying on it on its own, because it does produce hallucinations, and we know it's biased. It has biases, it has racial biases, as evidence suggests, and hopefully that will be ironed out in due course.
Thank you. So we can't uninvent it, but we need to go on improving it, I think, is what I take from that. I'm going to call the webinar to halt, but thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Rose, Sudhir, and Janice. Thank you to someone who's not on the call, Josh Freeman, my former colleague who's now at the Office for Students, because he, along with Giles, was the key sort of person putting this collection together before he moved on to another organisation. Thank you to other colleagues of mine, Charlotte, who's been tweeting away in the background, Emma in particular, who did all the back-end stuff to make sure the webinar worked, and also Carol, who's been supporting Emma. And then thank you, Giles, to you and your colleagues at the University of Southampton, because we couldn't have done this project without you. And what I would say to everybody listening in, and we've had over 500 people on this webinar, is if we weren't able to get to your question, if you've got a burning contribution you wish to make, do think about the HEPI blog, do think about other types of HEPI output. We want to continue leading this debate and making sure that AI delivers for students and staff. I say that as a think tank director, but also as a board member of a university and as a parent as well. So thank you for listening in. We have recorded the session. It'll be up on our YouTube channel later today. And thanks again to everybody who's been involved with the project. Enjoy the rest of your day.